The Residential Tenancies Bill, which has now passed the Dáil and is set to come into effect on the 1st of March, bringing major changes to the rental market. The new law will allow landlords to reset rents to market rates when a property becomes vacant, a move the government says will boost investment and supply, but which tenant groups warn could drive rents even higher. With protests having taken place outside Leinster House this week and concerns that tens of thousands of first-time renters could be affected, we're joined now by Megan Kenny, Threshold's National Casework Manager, to discuss what this all means. Megan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Alan, and thanks for having me this morning.
No, thanks for joining us on what is a really important issue. So the bill has now passed the Dáil, will come into effect on the 1st of next month. But from Threshold's perspective, Megan, what is the most significant change in this legislation?
I suppose from Threshold's perspective, Alan, there's two significant pieces that are quite relevant to renters. One is the security of tenure that will be applied to new tenancies, as well as the rent resets. So I suppose for the new tenancies created on or after the 1st of March, the security of tenure has increased. So a smaller landlord can end a tenancy under hardship or where they may require the property for a close family member or their own use, or where a land or a tenant, I suppose, fails to adhere by their obligation or tenancy. Whereas a larger landlord can't a tenancy 6-year cycle unless there is a breach. So that's, it is in the security of tenure issue. However, with the market rent resets, there is a concern there in terms of the rise in rents. And, I suppose as the legislation sets out, after the 6-year cycle, a landlord will be able to set the rent to market rates, or they may be able to do that if a tenant vacates the property on a voluntary basis within the 6 years.
And Megan, do you think that some of that is fair enough if the landlord needs to step in because of the reasons you've outlined, or if the tenant isn't fulfilling their end of the bargain, then that seems pretty fair.
Yeah, look, I suppose the government need to get the balance right in terms of the landlord's rights and as well as the tenant's rights. And, if there's breaches there and they're genuine breaches in terms of the landlord's ability to end a tenancy, we do think that's fair. But in the case where sometimes there's unfaithful actors, that's where we would have the concern that tenancies may be ended, where they really shouldn't be.
The government says existing tenants will not be affected. Do you think renters are clear on exactly who will be impacted?
I think there's a lot of confusion at the minute, and I suppose that's what we want to ensure that your listeners are aware of, that any existing tenancy is not affected by the legislation. So that's in relevance of the security of tenure. The current legislation will remain the same for any tenancy currently existing and it reaches its natural end.
The fear is, Megan, that up to 60,000 first-time renters could be impacted. I mean, what do you think this means in practical terms for someone entering the rental market this spring?
It's going to be challenging, Alan. I suppose with the rents being able to be reset, we need to see what market rent will be and where that level is. And I suppose what's really important for your listeners to understand is even within that 6-year cycle, the landlord will still be entitled to increase the rent by 2% or inflation, whichever is lower. So I suppose with that, every year there will be an increase, and then at the 6-year cycle, there's possibly another, and it's up to the landlord whether they choose to reset market rent.
The government's argument, as I'm sure you're well aware, Megan, is that 6-year minimum tenancies will actually provide greater security. But it doesn't sound, it sounds like you don't agree with that. Do you think the government are failing to see why some would view that statement with scepticism, or they're just choosing not to see it?
I think there's an unintended consequence with I suppose we understand the government's position in terms of getting the balance between the security of tenure but also the investment of supply. But unfortunately, really what's going to happen there is rents are going to rise. And, what we would have liked to have seen is a rent break within the legislation, so that could be avoided, rather than having to have an emergency legislative piece later in the future. But what we do think would be extremely helpful for the government to consider is to bring up the HAP rates, so the housing assistance payment rates, to market level, or to reflect what market level is at the moment, because they are quite low and they do really require that review for anybody who is availing of the homeless HAP or just your general housing assistance payment.
You want to see that happen, but given what you've seen from this government so far, do you think that is likely to happen anytime soon?
Well, we'd be hoping it would. We've certainly communicated our thoughts on it, and as many others. So I suppose what we would be hoping to see is that government see the need for that increase. Now, that doesn't have to be signed into the current legislation. That can happen after, but I suppose it would be great to see a commitment from the government to even review that with the plan to bring it to something that's closer to the market rates, because at the moment it is quite unsustainable.
I'm thinking of people who find themselves in the differing scenarios, Megan, those who, in families, lower income renters, those who unfortunately find themselves homeless, what impact this could have on them. And do you have any concerns, or does Threshold have any concerns that this could actually end up pushing more young people to emigrate or even move back home, as certainly some opposition politicians have suggested?
Yeah, absolutely. The knock-on effects could be endless, to be honest with you, Alan. But I suppose in Threshold's view, what we can do is support anybody who is impacted to provide advice and advocacy, if they are confused, which many are, because, existing tenants, they may not be affected right now, but that doesn't mean that they won't be affected in the future. Their tenants may naturally come to an end, their circumstances change where they need to voluntarily vacate their current tenancy and then move into alternative, which would be new tenancy after the 1st of March, and then this legislation will really impact them.
The government insists this is about attracting investment and increasing supply. Do you accept that argument? Do you think one or the other or both are likely to happen, or would you have your suspicions that it may not work out that well?
What we haven't seen from government is a modelling, and I suppose that has been our concern, to see where this investment in supply in 5 years' time, where are we going to be at? So if we were to see that, I think we would have more confidence. But I suppose, again, this isn't something that we will have control over, unfortunately, and it may seem that it's going to go ahead of modelling in place.
The government, speaking about investment, says it is necessary and it's not a dirty word. I guess, though, how do you balance the need for investment with tenant protections? Or is that possible? Is someone ultimately always going to end up being displeased on this particular issue, Megan? Either landlords, be it bigger or smaller, will be displeased at some elements of it, or if changes are made to help them out, it'll be the tenants who will be raising their voices. Yes.
And look, Alan, it's very difficult. We appreciate that, to get the balance right, in particular to private rented accommodation. But I suppose there's various ways that we see that the government should increase supply, and part of that is through social housing or cost rental accommodation. So seeing an increase in those areas will greatly take the pressure off in terms of rented accommodation. Bringing up the threshold for social housing supports, that will support in terms of the people being able to afford, because affordability seems to be the big issue that's coming out. I suppose when we're talking about this legislation, security of tenure is great, but it can be impacted naturally if people aren't able to actually afford these rents.
Just before I let you go, Megan, interesting text sent in here by a listener on 086 1800 964 saying they tracked a number of rental properties around Ennis over the last 3 months. The average increase in rent, according to this listener, was 40%, done in advance of the new rules, and tenancies don't usually last for approximately 3 years. So at the end of that 3 years, the landlord can increase the rent. So this will be like a dog chasing its tail.
Yes, exactly. And I suppose at the end of those 3 years, the rent can increase to market level, but under certain circumstances, if it was a no-fault eviction, that's where the landlord wouldn't be able to increase the rent. Whereas if it was an eviction based on, the tenants maybe breaching their obligations or a voluntary exit, that's where the landlord would be able to increase market rent.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see how it goes once it comes in on the 1st of next month. We'll park that there for the moment, Megan. No doubt we'll be speaking to you again very soon. Thanks for joining us on Morning Focus.
No problem. Thanks so much, Alan.
Thank you. That's Megan Kenny, Threshold's National Casework Manager